I've got some slides, so I'm going to try to get those up here. I think I just...
If you hit F5.
F5. Okay. All right. I want to thank Bob for inviting me to come to this meeting today and to talk with you about advocacy efforts on behalf of graduate education. And I think that there are a number of important issues and themes contained in the report, The Path Forward. I think there are two very central messages. One is that graduate education is a strategic national asset for this country, and it needs to be nurtured to remain viable and strong. And the report has a number of recommendations designed to support this first point from the perspective that graduate education is central not only to the success, our economic success, but to the quality of life that we have in the United States. I wanted to talk just for a minute about why are these issues important now? Why is now the time for us to be focused on graduate education and moving forward to advance the enterprise? And I think that we've heard many of the reasons why this is important now this morning in James Wimbush's presentation and in the video. It all relates to our competitiveness, our quality of life, developing the human talent that we need to be successful in the global economy. If we look to the past, we know that much of our technological success in the past 50 years has derived in large part from our investments in human talent. The National Defense Education Act that Congress enacted in 1958 has been, in different publications, cited as one of the 10 most important pieces of federal legislation. It supported the development of an entire generation of scientists and thought leaders in the United States. Many of the people who were educated under the National Defense Education Act are now approaching retirement. And so we are faced with the need to replenish a very important talent pool in the United States. And of course, support for graduate education to help more people move into critical fields where we need expertise, fields like energy, healthcare, climate change, the financial sector. Support for graduate education to help students move into these areas is just critical. And so one of the things I'd like to talk about today is how graduate education leaders, as well as other stakeholders, can work together here in Illinois, but other places as well, to advance the recommendations in the report. And I think, of course, you're off to a great start here today, because this conference has the three critical sectors involved. We have higher education leaders, we have business leaders, and we have representatives of policymakers. And as you know, one of the overarching recommendations in the report is that all three of these sectors need to collaborate and work together in advancing the report's recommendations. Now, we are living in the era of accountability, and there is increased interest among policymakers in accountability in the higher education enterprise. And so I think it's very important for leaders in graduate education to talk about the recommendations for universities that are in the report and what we are doing in graduate education to address issues and challenges that we have. And of course, those challenges are working on improving completion rates at the doctoral level and at the master's level, addressing time to degree, and working with our students to clarify pathways into various careers and not just into the academic sector. Because one of the things we know is that many graduate students go on to work in other sectors, the nonprofit sector, the government sector, not just the academic sector. Many graduate deans and other higher education officials meet with their elected representatives, both at the federal level and the state level, and that's something that I would recommend must be just a continual, steady process. I think it's very important for federal policymakers, congressional staff, state policymakers to understand the value of graduate education, because they need to understand the value of graduate education before they make decisions that support the enterprise. In my experience, I was a congressional staffer many years ago in the Senate, and I think that most policymakers end up supporting things that they understand and care about in some way. So part of our job is at making graduate education real. And one of the ways that I think we can do that, not only through the efforts of deans and other higher education leaders, but is to involve students. And that's why I'm very glad to see that we have a couple of students who are participating in this conference today, because I think that policymakers really like to hear what students are doing and what students are working on, graduate students, and how what they're working on is helping to solve specific issues or problems that a state faces or a locality faces or that the country faces. Now, there are a couple of opportunities, things on the federal policy agenda in Congress that I just want to take a moment to talk about. One, and you have some handouts in the books that we produced at the Council of Graduate Schools. First thing I want to talk about is the America Competes Act. This is a piece of federal legislation that is currently up for reauthorization in Congress. And then the Competes Act was enacted 3 years ago. It was the piece of legislation that embodied many of the recommendations that were contained in the Rising Above the Gathering Storm report from the National Academy of Sciences. And that report urged increased investments in higher education in a variety of ways. As an aside, the original statute authorized the professional science master's program that exists now at the National Science Foundation. So the Competes Act is up for reauthorization. Ben mentioned that it's been passed by the House of Representatives, which was a good thing. And the House bill, and you have a summary of that in the book, the House bill does contain a number of provisions that support graduate education, and this bill also reauthorizes NSF as part of Competes, and it authorizes NSF to make awards to establish innovative doctoral and master's degrees programs at the foundation. It urges increased support for the graduate research fellowships, the GRFs and the IGERTs at NSF. Supports fellowships at the Department of Energy that would support graduate students, and a variety of other things. On the Senate side, the Competes Act is under consideration, has not passed the Senate yet, and it is a very different bill from the House bill. I would describe it as a more streamlined bill, have had a number of conversations in the Senate about this bill, and there's a real need for it to be bipartisan in order for it to pass that House. It may or may not come up during the lame duck session of Congress after the election, but it is, and you have a side-by-side comparison of the House provisions and the Senate provisions in the book as well. So I would urge you to take a look at that, and in any conversations that you're having with congressional policymakers or their staff, should talk about the importance of the Competes Act and supporting graduate education as part of that effort.